I've met Gregg a little over a year ago. He got involved with the MBTA Communities Act and taught everybody in Shrewsbury a lot about that issue. And since then, I've run into him multiple occasions advocating for the residents of Shrewsbury. And I couldn't be more impressed with Gregg. His knowledge, his passion. He's not looking for anything for himself. He has no issues directly related to him. He literally just wants to give access to the residents of Shrewsbury. And he has a great awareness of the issues and looking beyond the obvious. So he brings a diverse point of view to every discussion. So I'm hopeful that he will be our next select board member. And with that, I'd like to have Gregg come up.
All right, thank you.
Wow,
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate everybody coming here this evening. And I thought I wanted to really do is I want to kind of go back to the beginning because I think it's important to know, I think, how I got here, why we're here, and why I decided to do this. So how many people are married here or significant others? Okay, quite a few. Does your spouse or significant other ever volunteer you for things?
Voluntold.
Yes. So my wife, right, is Christy, is my biggest cheerleader, and actually she was a cheerleader, and she has the knees to prove it, actually. You know. And about a year ago, she said, "Would you be willing to MC an event about the MBTA at the library?" And I said, "Okay, absolutely." And that MC turned into a full-blown presentation, which ultimately lent itself to where we are here today. But if I would go back, I think it just started with maybe a Facebook post, and there was a notification that, hey, there's a session at the police station about this MBTA Communities Act. And Christy's like, "I think we're going to go." I said, "All right, we'll go." And at that session, I happened to meet Brian Costello. And I had never met him before. And we started talking and realized that we had a lot in common. And when we left that session, I kind of kept his name in the back of my head. And then once I was asked to MC and present, I said, "You know what? I'm going to rope somebody else into this." So I contacted Brian. I said, "Brian, would you do this with me?" He said, "Absolutely." So as I started to research and I did that presentation on the MBTA, one thing struck in my mind. I said, you know, I don't think this is in the best interest of Shrewsbury. You know, let's take a look at this for a second. We're going to have all this additional traffic. We're already on Route 20. There's a ton of development going on. There's going to be a big impact to the schools because we're going to have a lot more school children. What's that going to do to our school system? And this really seems really more in favor of developers than the residents of Shrewsbury. And I said, I'm not sure this resonates. This doesn't make sense. So I decided I was going to go to a public hearing. Now, I've not participated previously from a year ago in a lot of public hearings, except for my first experience, which was with conservation. So if anybody's ever gone to a conservation meeting or been there, it's not really a fun process. And one thing I really learned in my observation was, as a resident of Shrewsbury, the perception would be that the boards are there to support and help residents through a process. And what I felt was that I was there begging for permission to do something on my own property. And not only what I felt like I was begging, that individuals could make decisions that impacted my life subjectively. And that project, which was supposed to be, you know, a joyous thing for me and my family about putting in a pool, came off really bad and turned into a disaster of a 4-week delay, 2 meetings, thousands of dollars with engineers, multiple meetings. And I said, you know, there has to be a better way. And that resonated with me as I went back and started talking in these planning board meetings and advocating on behalf of this MBTA. I said, I don't think this really makes sense. Or have we really done due diligence? And that whole process to me, you know, I just felt like we weren't being heard. And while, you know, ultimately we ended up being quite successful along the way. And I think it was because, you know, a lot of people in this room who I started talking to, joined in and said, you know what? If he can get up there and talk about it, I can too. And I think that's what the other thing is. One person can make a difference. And I think a lot of times people say, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to go vote in a local election. What does it matter? Well, I know it matters because there's everybody in this room because, of a decision of attending, say, a meeting and then deciding, hey, I'm going to get up and speak. I am going to have a voice around it. And I think that was just really fulfilling for me and kind of brought me to the point where I said, if I'm going to lead and we're going to make a good example for our children, and my son, Gavin here, is also amazing. He's the videographer, he's the graphic designer, and he's done a ton of work in trying to support me along the way here as well. I want to set a good example for him, and I want to make sure that we're leading and we're showing that example to our children and saying we should leave this place better than where we started. And if we don't get involved, nobody's going to get involved. So throughout that whole process, we went through the MBTA process. We were successful in getting them to push the article to the fall. They had to submit a pre-adoption review. And we were right about the first zone. It got rejected. It got pushed to the fall. And we ended up not liking what the result of that November election was, so we decided let's do a referendum. And when we did that referendum, a lot of people in this room, we sat multiple hours freezing at Price Chopper. But we had a lot of great conversations. We talked to 1,500, 1,800 people across Shrewsbury, and all of them, came up and said, I don't know about this MBTA thing, but I don't like what we're doing around, what about the schools? And yeah, I think we are doing overdevelopment. And just being able to listen to the community, and a lot of people, unfortunately said, I used to be involved with the community. I used to be a town meeting member, but I gave it up. I said, why'd you give it up? Because I didn't feel like I was heard. And I just don't think that that's the way the local government's supposed to run. If anything, the local government's where we can make the biggest impact. You get 70% of the people go when they vote in these federal elections, and most of those issues, yeah, they're important, but do they affect you every day? Like when you're driving down the street and say, it'd be great if we had a stop sign here, or hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a park to play in, or wouldn't this be great if we had a newer school because this school's a little run down or it's overcrowded? Those are the issues we can make impacts on, and a lot of times they're ignored. So throughout this whole process, I think the catalyst for me, there's two occasions where I said I'm running for select board. The first one was after I did the citizens petition for an elected planning board. And I stood in front of town meeting, I'd never been there before. 240 people plus, and advocating and putting out facts around why I thought a planning board is a good idea. And after I stopped my speech, the first thing that happened was people stood up. People who had been in elected positions in this town for a long time or appointed positions in this town. And they didn't say out of their mouth, thank you for getting involved and thank you for advocating on this. I don't know if it's the right thing for our town, but I appreciate what you did. Instead, they said, first thing out of their mouth, I don't feel I was properly warned because you didn't follow the proper process and procedure, and you don't get to speak here unless you follow the right procedure, is how I took it. And then the next person stood up. And then the next person stood up, all with pre-done comments, all nice and written out to say, we appreciate you coming, but, essentially we don't serve your kind. So it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I remember walking back up the aisle and then right to my wife, and I turned to her and I said, I'm running for select board. And I sat back down. And then I guess it died off a little bit, and I was like, well, I'm not sure, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But then the second thing that happened that really solidified the decision was after the referendum vote. We had gone out, we had gotten all the signatures, we put it on the ballot, and they put every barrier in place to ensure we were not successful. Shorten the time of when the election was going to be. You don't send out notice in a number of times. You limit the number of hours in the election, and everything along the way was putting barriers up to ensure the outcome was what they wanted. And on that election day, I think there was a ton of people says, I don't know if we're going to be able to win this thing. And I remember when I first looked at that precinct, I guess it was the precinct 1 result, and it was essentially a 60-40 no to yes. And I was like, oh wow, we won one precinct. And then as precinct after precinct after precinct, and we end up 61-39. That is a I would say, an almost mandate across the town that said, this is not something that Shrewsbury residents want. And you would have thought that the select board and others, the town manager would have said, whew, maybe we were wrong. But they didn't. They just moved right along and said, oh, didn't hit the threshold, moving on, and they didn't address it. And I said, you can't do that. You need to validate the residents. And I made the decision to stand up in front of them on February 11th and let them know I didn't feel as though they validated the community. And because of that, if we're not going to validate the voice of the people and the will of the people, it has to change. And that's when I announced that I was going to be here tonight running for select board. So for me, it isn't about, let's say, a specific issue that's catalyst of why I decided to do this. It's a culmination of the process, the way that people are treated, the way that the current people in Shrewsbury, or at least the current elected and appointed leaders, treat those who should be number one. For me, it should always be residents first. The residents, right, are in control and should be directing the government, not the other way around. They should be implementing our will, but oftentimes they're imposing their will on us. And that's not the way this is supposed to work. So my belief is what will be, will be. I'm going to work hard over the next 5 weeks with everyone's help in this room, hopefully. And I think that message should resonate. And I'm hoping on May 6th, when I'll be back at Town Hall, that I'll see that same result that I did back on that day of the referendum. That 60% of the vote went to Gregg Richards for select board. And with that, I thank you.